Okay, let's get started. So, good morning again to everybody and welcome to our kickoff webinar for 2015, Advocate for Your EVP, How to Get the Resources You Need Internally to Have a Breakout Year for Your Program in 2015. My name is Lauren Wagner and I'm the Senior Manager of Engagement at VolunteerMatch, and I'm going to be helping to facilitate things this morning. So before we get started, we'll go through a few housekeeping items. I think you have to click. All right. So we are going to be saving a few minutes at the end to pose your questions to our presenters. So there are a few different ways that you can submit your questions throughout the webinar this morning. The first is by typing them into that questions box on the right side of your screen. And the second is to submit them through Twitter by tweeting to @VM_solutions using the hashtag DMVPN. So again, throughout the webinar this morning, we're going to collect those questions and hold them until the end, and then save the last 15 minutes or so to pose them to the presenters. So make sure you keep them coming in throughout the morning. Also, just a quick reminder that we will be sharing a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recording of the webinar after the live event. So you will get all of this information as follow-up. All right, so a little overview about kind of what we're going to be talking about this morning and the presenters that we have on the call. So this morning's webinar was inspired by two white papers that we released last month, both of which you can download on our site, and we'll make sure after the webinar this morning that we send you guys those links so that you can get them in more detail. But based on over a decade of VolunteerMatch working with the world's leading companies to support their employee and volunteer programs, we designed these white papers to take you through easy steps for launching an EVP and deciding how to best support that program with technology, as well as some of the questions and considerations that you should keep in mind as you're going through this process. So this morning we're going to be diving into those questions and considerations in a little bit more detail. And as we move through the webinar, we'll hear some real-life examples from Appirio and OhioHealth on how they were able to position their programs internally, engage key stakeholders, and become advocates for the resources that they needed to take their EVPs to the next level. So before we dive into the meat of the webinar, I'd like to take a second to introduce you to our presenters. So first we have Julie Vandelinder, who is the Vice President of Client Services here at VolunteerMatch. Prior to joining the VolunteerMatch team in 2014, Julie was actually still part of the VolunteerMatch family in her role at Nationwide Insurance, where she led the employee giving and volunteering programs for the company's 50,000 employees, agents, and retirees. Next, we'll hear from Debbie Donahey, the Community Relations Manager at OhioHealth, which is a nationally recognized not-for-profit charitable healthcare organization. Debbie is responsible for relationship building, including a portfolio of nonprofit community partners to maximize engagement and connect OhioHealth programs and services in the community. And she's also responsible for OhioHealth's associate engagement through volunteerism. And last but certainly not least, we have Rachel Tallant on the line. Rachel is going to be sharing her experience with Appirio, where she serves as the Director of HR programs, including their Silver Lining program, which is the company's EVP. Rachel has over 13 years of experience in operations and training management in high tech, as well as many hours of connecting with her community through volunteering locally. So we have a lot to cover this morning, so without further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Julie to get us started.
Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to those of you who are joining us from the East Coast. We're very excited to have a couple of great experts from the field actually speaking on this topic. Whether you're new to beginning an EVP or kind of an old hat, always looking for best practices, I think you'll find these two speakers quite engaging. So to get started, we're actually going to have Rachel start by sharing a little bit more about Appirio so that you have some context of her program. Rachel, do you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, and welcome everyone. We're really excited to be here. Just to tell you a little bit about Appirio itself, we're a global cloud services consulting company and a trusted partner to some of the largest brands. So ones that you're all familiar with, Coca-Cola, eBay, Facebook, Virgin America are just a couple of them. And what we really do is to help them transform their businesses to cloud technology so that they can be more effective and efficient. In terms of the Silver Lining program, that's our social responsibility program, and that was actually really started as a grassroots effort by our employees in 2010. So what we focus on, you can see on the slide here, is donating time, talent, and technology. And we focus that both globally, since we are a global company, but then also really tying it to our local communities in terms of our volunteer program. And we launched VolunteerMatch the first week of January 2015, so just a few weeks back. And it's been really successful so far. We're really excited to get it off the ground.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Next we have Debbie, who's going to share an overview of OhioHealth.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you for hosting us today. And for everyone on the line, hello. I wanted to share a little bit about OhioHealth and who we are. We're a nonprofit health system located here in Columbus, Ohio. The reason you can see on the slide the information that I shared with you about our program, but we really launched this because as a growing system, we were trying to find a tool that could help us measure the impact of how we're reaching out into the community. We heard from a lot of our associates who are volunteering, but we really didn't have a great measurement of that, so needed a tool to do that. And to align with our mission, so you can see the name of our program, Mission Matters, is really important to us to align with our mission. So, and that is to improve the health of those we serve. We launched our program in July of 2014, the beginning of our fiscal year. We are waiting for the results of this year to really set some strong goals for the next year, but we're really on track to meet those goals, and we're excited to see where this takes us. So,
great, thanks for sharing, Debbie. So before we get started, we thought it would be great to just get to understand our audience a little bit better. So we're going to take a couple of quick polls just to kind of see who's out there today. The first poll we're going to do is asking you to describe your volunteerism at your organization. So we're just interested in knowing if you're really at kind of a grassroots level where you don't have any particular formal structure, or if you're maybe a little more advanced than that, you have an established structure, but perhaps you're newly formed in your organization, or C, that you have an established structure and you're mature, and you're really here just to find out what are some of the best practices of your peers.
All right, so we're going to launch the poll. If everybody can take a second to vote. All right, looks like we have some results coming in. We'll give you just a few more seconds to get some more responses. All right. All right, so we'll go ahead and close the poll and then share the results with you guys.
Great. So while it looks like about half our audience does have an established structure and is fairly mature, it looks like quite a few of you are really kind of in those beginning stages of either really being kind of an employee-led type of program within your organization, or you just newly formed. So I think you'll find today will be really helpful. And we're going to do our next poll.
Here we go. There we go.
Sorry, a little technical difficulty this morning. Our next question is really about understanding your executive support at your organization. We know that having deeply embedded stakeholders who are rooting for you every day is really critical. And so we just wanted to get an understanding of how formalized that is within your organization. So first question really is around, or I'm sorry, the first selection is whether or not, around not having an executive sponsor. So you're really just kind of grassroots. You don't have necessarily someone at that senior level advocating for you. The second response is about having an executive champion or mentor who's really informally championing your cause. So it's maybe somebody who's really invested in community involvement, who has access to those higher levels of engagement within the organization, but isn't necessarily formally leading your group. Or C, you have an executive sponsor formal, you're in their organizational structure.
All right, so we'll go ahead and launch this one. All right, looks like we have some results coming in. Give you guys a few more seconds to get your responses. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
So while a fair amount of you do have an executive sponsor, it appears that more than half of this group actually is either without a sponsor or is really working with someone informally to help champion the program. So definitely appreciate you sharing that. We'll make sure that we kind of weave this through as we begin our conversation. So as we talk about today, what we wanted to start off with is just talking about what are some of those factors that are essential to building a successful EVP. And so, as you look at the screen, you'll see some obvious ones around having goals, thinking about your structure, building momentum, and then being able to evaluate and repeat your successes. Some of the things that you want to really think about is just what is your company culture like? Are people very formal, informal? Do you already have a lot of activities where your employees are already participating? What's the level of engagement with your leaders? Do you have people sitting on boards, for example? You also really want to be thinking about who are your stakeholders. It's really important to understand within your organization how decisions are made and what types of resources do you need to be successful. And figuring out how to build those coalitions to really ensure that you are able to not only start a program, but be able to sustain that program. You also want to be thinking about what types of promises have you made. What is it you're wanting to accomplish? So what have you communicated internally that you're hoping you'll be successful? And then also, what types of partnerships do you already have existing, and what types of engagement have you been doing in the community, and what are their expectations of you? And then also figuring out how you'll know when you've been successful. So what are those long-term goals, but also what are those short-term goals that you can capitalize on in order to continue to build success? And then thinking about what measures you will be using. To help with this conversation, what we have decided to do today is really have a panel discussion around what are the things that we've learned as we kick off these programs and mature these programs to ensure that they do achieve success around those goals and are able to build momentum. And so Rachel and Debbie are going to be participating in this dialogue really to give you their point of view as our clients of how they've been successful in doing this. Just a reminder, as we move through this conversation, please feel free to use the chat feature that you see on your screen to send us questions or comments, and we'll make sure that we reflect on those through the conversation. So as you're either designing your program or you're kind of evaluating your program, one important considerations is thinking about who needs to be at the table. We've called out a couple of examples of different classes of individuals that you would want to engage. But the things that you want to be thinking about is how are these people going to help you be successful in either obtaining budget or getting approval on particular policies, giving you some resources. So for example, if you're trying to communicate with your entire employee population, how are you going to communicate and when? Who's going to help you navigate some of those delicate matters related to human resources, particularly when people are maybe wanting to step away from work time to go volunteer in their community. Individuals who are going to help you with that C-suite engagement. While it's not absolutely a necessity, we found that most successful programs tend to have high engagement not only within their employee staff base and middle managers, but also at that senior executive level. And then also helps you understand what are some of the risks that are engaged in this type of work so that you can adequately plan. And so to that vein, Rachel, can you maybe share who you decided to include in your team when you were starting to develop the Silver Lining program?
Sure, definitely. When I stepped into Appirio, into this role specifically, the program was already established, and so we had an established executive. program. Who were the people that may be statistics and information to be able to support a program? So what were people looking for? What were employees looking for in terms of what they wanted to see in success metrics? What were managers looking for? You know, where they were looking for how to decrease attrition or increase engagement. So I also tried to figure out really what each individual group was looking for and how I could bring that to the table.
Awesome, thank you. Debbie, I know that your program is fairly mature. As you guys go through and evaluate from year to year new goals and how you're continuing to try and expand the momentum, is there anybody that you have decided to engage that you haven't previously to help you achieve success there?
Well, initially, I just have to start with the fact that I didn't really move forward until I had my VP approval. So once I had a new VP on board to help with our system that was, like you said, fairly mature, but we really didn't have a tool as our system was growing as to what we could use to measure our success. So this tool was key, and getting that buy-in to get this tool budgeted was my first hurdle. So once I had my my VP on board, I was able to move forward with talking with other folks and getting buy-in and other stakeholders engaged. The team members that I wanted to make sure we had our community relations team who was going to support this project and dedicate those resources to this specific project. I needed to make sure those folks had time dedicated to use the tool and learn the tool. I got communications involved. They were key for this project, as well as human resources to align with our, you know, they were working on lots of projects related to associate engagement and aligning with our culture. So this fit right into that. And then, of course, our IS team to project manage the whole process was key.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so you just touched on a couple of really great pieces of information, both from, you know, making sure that you're thinking at all levels. So Rachel, I loved your comment about bringing in those employee champions to really help you kind of think about how you build momentum. And then Debbie, you know, you raised a really good point about the fact that you have to really make sure you start within by building a really uniform front within your own team, just to make sure that you're going to be successfully navigating outward. And then, you know, pulling in those other stakeholders that are going to offer you resources as you move forward is just absolutely critical. The next, you know, piece of building a successful EVP program or employee volunteer program is really about making sure that you're establishing good concrete goals that people really understand. And there's some really critical factors that you want to consider as you think about those goals. And so, you know, one of the first obvious ones is just, you know, looking at your company and the mission and the industry and understanding, you know, what is the culture of the organization, and really thinking critically about how do you want to be perceived. You know, I think as, you know, programs have matured, understanding not only what your employees think, but what are consumers thinking about you, what's the community thinking about you? Even in some of those more highly regulated industries, what are regulators perceiving about you? Corporate reputation is definitely a significant factor. And then, you know, the next piece is that you may have really formal or informal relationships with, you know, nonprofits currently. So just understanding where you are in those relationships, how mature are they? What types of resources do they have to help ensure your success? So making sure that there's capacity there, so as you deepen that relationship, you are going to be successful in those goals, whether you're making a statement to try and reduce poverty or help kids in school with math, just being able to ensure that as a partnership you can move forward. And then really thinking about what is it you want to obtain out of the program, what are some of those outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. So, are you trying to derive more engagement out of your employees so they feel better about your organization being a great place to work? Really understanding what our manager is hoping to achieve and how does your program impact them so that you can help actively engage them to be supportive of those goals. And then, really thinking about your employee base. As companies evolve, they're becoming more global. You have people who are traveling more, people who are utilizing PDAs and smartphones. So those are all important factors as you think about how you're going to craft goals that are going to be successful. Debbie, when you go through the annual goals process, what are some of the things that you consider at OhioHealth when you think about what is the stake in the ground you're going to chase after in 2015?
Well, being a not-for-profit health system, I think we're in a very unique position. We're one of the major employers in our communities that we're in. We are based in Central Ohio, so we're not outside of Ohio, which is nice for managing the program. But I think it's we're in a unique position to give back. So that's very important to us. And how do we make sure we tell that story that we are giving back without tools to do that? I talked about getting approval for the tool, but that didn't mean I was getting additional resources of people. So I needed to look at something that could help me grow this program without growing the people and my staff. So that was really important. In addition, we're a Fortune 100 Best Places to Work company, and we have a culture of giving. So we want to make sure that we have stories to tell, and I think by having tools to show where people are giving of their time, we're getting some really great stories out of that data. We have a culture of giving, so again, aligning with those values of compassion, which is giving back to our community. That's it shows the kind of the results of those values in action. So that's kind of where we set our goals.
Great, thank you. And Rachel, I know that you came into an established program, but you decided to bring in some additional stakeholders. What kind of process do you go through in terms of figuring out your expectations and goals for Silver Lining, in particular, 2015? How did you go about that process?
Yeah, I mean, our program in terms of social responsibility is really broken into 3 areas. The first being the volunteer employee program, the second being our pro bono program, and the third being corporate donations. And so we've really segmented those out to create individual goals for each one of those areas. If we look specifically at the volunteer program, that I really feel is something that should be broad and really driven by the employee base. So one of the first things that we did is to survey the population to find out what are they interested in. One of the challenges with Appirio is that we are a global company that's very diverse, which is fabulous because we have locations all over the world to be able to help our customers, but in terms of the program, it also adds some additional challenges. And so when you're thinking those kinds of things through, what types of programs or what types of goals are you going to be able to put in place when everyone is not in a single location and a lot of people are dispersed throughout the field? So a lot of those things we took into consideration and then really always brought it back to what's the mission of the Silver Lining program, and really it is, to take a look at giving back at the local communities where our employees are. And so that's why we wanted to hear from them and have them help us define what those goals are.
Great, thank you. And then, of course, you need to have a really good structure to support those goals. And so you have to think about the communications you need to do, the planning, and then, of course, the resources. Debbie, question to you. How do you go about getting the buy-in from departments that are outside of your core team? What are some of the things you're doing to build those coalitions so that, those other groups will give you resources when you need them?
Yes, that's really important. What was really helpful for us, which I don't know if the stars were aligned or what, but the human resources was definitely working on the associate engagement strategy. And one of the communications managers working on that project was brought in to help us launch our VolunteerMatch tool. So in looking at that and also launching a new intranet site, it was just so helpful that that same communications manager was working on the project and could see that alignment, and it was so helpful because she was in meetings related to social engagement that really helped us as we were building this program. And also that, you know, really kind of assured optimum real estate on the intranet because she was involved, so that was really helpful.
Great, thank you. And then Rachel, you know, you've gone through the more recent edition of systems and tools for the Silver Lining program, and trying to think about, you know, obviously the integration of your global audience is really critical as well. How did you make the case to be able to support it financially, being a smaller organization?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the CEO and the board are already very supportive of the program, but certainly, you know, like any program, we've got budgets that we have to adhere to and justifications that we need to make internally. So once I had created the overall strategy and had really socialized that with the executive team, I created a tiered budget investment doc, and what I first did to do that is really look at what are our run rates in the past for our program budget, what was the cost per head, what did that help us do in terms of positive impacts in the community. And then when I looked at our more structured program and what we wanted to do in 2015 and beyond, I offered up 3 different alternatives in terms of budgets and the different types of program investments that we could make, program designs, and then impact areas. And so it was really just having the conversation with the CEO and with the SVP of Human Resources to talk through what we had invested in the past, where we wanted to go in the future, what we wanted to do with the program. And then once we determined which budget we were going with, then socializing that out to the rest of the executive team, the board, and the finance team as well.
Great, thank you. So both of you have raised really great points that I just wanted to call out. I think the first one of just finding a way to link to other corporate objectives can really help you build momentum around that coalition and get more kind of support from broader groups across the organization. So definitely wanted to make sure I call that out. And then illustrative points of how people on board you can get with you so that you can start to get the resources and the structure you need to really ultimately be successful. And so, you know, every good program requires something that's going to help it continue. It's one thing to launch something, or to start something, but it's another thing to actually continue to build momentum. And I'm sure for many of you, you have that challenge of how do I do more when I don't necessarily have a large amount of resources to work with. It's not uncommon for employee volunteer programs to have only one FTE or even a shared FTE among different needs, and so it's always a challenge to figure out how you balance the effort versus the reward. But you know, in order to build momentum, you know, the key things are making sure that you're continually getting buy-in across your organization, and also sharing what you're doing. You know, as you share results and people become more confident in knowing what your organization is actually achieving from the work that they're doing, it can be huge in terms of getting your employees to go viral and talk about, you know, what it is that's great about the organization, and your employees are interfacing with consumers and, you know, interfacing with various members of the community. So it's a great way to get that messaging out there. thinking about what kinds of compelling stories can you share that really differentiates what you're doing in behalf of the business compared to maybe some of your peers in marketing or sales. And then, of course, doing the recognition, making sure that, people, they don't necessarily volunteer for recognition, but people do appreciate being thanked, and I think it's important to also consider that, when people are giving of their time, they want to know that it mattered. And so, with that, Rachel, what are some effective ways that you're sharing the stories of silver lining at Appirio?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think that this really does help to drive momentum, and we do it in a number of different ways. We use Salesforce internally, so we actually have a group that people can join, and it's company-wide, and everyone can share their specific stories there. So we get a lot of people kind of piling on to those posts. People will share specific things that they gave to in terms of donations or their time. They'll share pictures, they'll share stories, and a lot of other people will comment on those. We also have a weekly communication for our volunteer challenge. So everyone who volunteers in the prior week gets automatically entered into our corporate challenge for volunteering. And we choose winners for that at the end of the year, and the prize is actually a donation back to the charity of their choice. So that's another way really to get people involved in talking about the program. We also have badges in our incentive system that gets awarded different store points. That, again, they can purchase charitable gift cards with those as well, where they can basically, if they donate blood or something like that, there's a little badge for blood donation that they can award for themselves. We also have an end-of-the-year video and a year-in-review book that we put out with all of the pictures, different volunteer stories, information, and the overall impacts that the program has had. And then we have, in terms of social media, Facebook, Twitter, and then also an employee blog, which allows our employees to tell kind of a deeper story rather than just a quick post. They can actually get into more detail about which organization they worked with, how they help to impact them, and then that also inspires other people to get involved as well.
That's great, thank you. Lots going on in Appirio. We'll have to see a copy of that book. Debbie, you have a similar challenge of getting out the information, sharing stories, but you have to scale it across a really large organization. What are some things that you found have been effective in either doing recognition or social sharing of the people at OhioHealth?
I just took notes with everything Rachel just shared because those are great ideas. Being a new program, you need to kind of get the attention of the organization, so get through the weeds. So really what we're trying to do is make sure we tell the story in all the different venues that we have available to us. Not just our intranet, but all of our news sheets, and in our department meetings. So we continue to go out to departments and do presentations regarding mission matters. We kind of highlight those champions that are doing great things, and making sure we tell those stories, and those news sheets show pictures. Again, it's all about a budget is always an issue. So, we use our marketing team. Our marketing folks have relationships with the local hockey team and the crew, our soccer team, and with our Columbus Zoo. And with those sponsorships of marketing sponsorships, we're able to secure tickets. So we use those incentives to get people that are doing great things and who are being our ambassadors in this program to give them incentives. Like you said, they don't do it for those incentives, but it's just nice recognition for those folks who are going above and beyond.
Yeah. No, and you raised a really good point, which is that sometimes, especially if you do really good coalition building and get those other stakeholders engaged, sometimes you can reach across the aisle and get resources from other groups that can help you, kind of achieve those opportunities for recognition or incentives. And so, you know, in addition to some of those creative ideas of how you get people engaged, just thinking about, you know, different ways to engage some of your peers in the organization to kind of help you achieve that, you know, can really help you. It won't help you maybe get the bigger budget, but sometimes it makes your budget feel a little bit bigger. Sometimes. And then, you know, of course, is it working? So, you know, as they say, you know, if you don't measure it, it doesn't get done. And so just, you know, on that level, you know, Rachel, what are some things that you do to measure success?
So we have ours broken out into 3 different categories: time, talent, and technology. In terms of time donation, we look at the number of hours volunteered. We also look at the success and engagement of our corporate-wide volunteer day, our company-wide day of service. We look at the number of nonprofits that we've impacted as well. In terms of talent, we look at the number of pro bono hours that were donated and the number of challenges that were run in our community. We have an extended community that works with us of over 700,000 people. So we look at those as well. In terms of technology, that's really specific to individual project success. So we've done a couple of projects just recently with Can Do Canines and 92Y, which is actually the group that puts together Giving Tuesday. And so with those, we really look to individual project metrics and whether or not those were successful. We are also, you know, looking to 2015 to re-up our annual survey and also take a look at what people are viewing in terms of the impact from hiring to staying with the company and how important the Silver Lining Program is to them. And then the newest metric that we're introducing is actually around voluntary attrition. So if we equate engagement with staying with the organization longer and being more successful with the company, we're taking a look at the number of times that employees have volunteered and then their tenure with the company as well. So we don't have that specific data right now, but that's something that we're building to in 2015. So really excited about that.
Rachel, that's awesome. It's great to hear some of the different types of metrics that you're using to measure success. And we may come back to you in a future BPN to kind of understand what did you learn from that and how did you get to those numbers. So that's
sure. Happy to join.
So this is Lauren. I hate to interrupt, but we did have a question come in, and it kind of goes perfectly with what you were just talking about, Rachel. And you mentioned tracking engagement as something that you track to measure your success. And somebody asked if you could kind of expand upon what metrics you track to determine engagement.
Sure. So right now, I mean, the Human Resources Department tracks a lot of different things around engagement. Specifically for the volunteer program, what we're looking at is there a correlation between the number of times that someone volunteers within a year period and their tenure with the company. So for example, we're going to take a look at the tenure of people who have volunteered either one time during the year or less, and the tenure of people who have volunteered 2 times during the year or more. And so really tying those 2 types of things together to see, is there actually a difference? Are the people who are volunteering more engaged and therefore, you know, staying with the company longer because they're engaged in a lot of different ways? So that's the specific metric for the volunteer program itself.
Thank you so much.
Great. And then Debbie, you know, hindsight is always 20/20, as they say. After you've had a chance to evaluate either an element of your program or your program in its entirety, is there anything that you found you've changed after having the chance to see the performance? And just how did you kind of go about making that change?
Well, I really would have liked to have a more robust rollout that included budget for additional attention, I guess. But I think we did the best with what we could and didn't want to have that hold up the launch of the program. Mm-hmm. And I would just say, just make sure you try to incorporate it into the systems you currently have in place, and don't make it like a standalone. make it align with the current things you're doing, such as, if the human resources team is working on a project, make sure they know this is part of recognition. This is part of associate engagement. So it's aligning with all the strategies of the organization. It's not just the program over there that you're doing for volunteerism. It's really aligning with the strategies of the organization.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not so much what's in it for me, it's what's in it for you, let me tell you. So,
exactly.
Great call out there. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. Talking a little bit about finding the right EVP management system or tools. This next part of the discussion isn't going to be a sales pitch, so we're not here to sell what we do, but more having to clients who have recently come on board with us. We find that when people go through this process of evaluating either purchasing a new system entirely for their program or needing to maybe make some changes, it can be a stressful process. And so we've found over the years that for a lot of our clients, they don't necessarily have a lot of support around how to do this in their organization well. And so what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about that process and what are some of the things that Rachel and Debbie have learned in their recent times of going through this process, and what kind of nuggets they would share with you, especially if they could do it all over again. So the first thing we're going to do is take a quick poll. Really what we just kind of want to understand is from this audience, we just kind of want to see where you are in terms of the kinds of tools you use. So for some organizations, you may be using some more classic tools like bulletin boards and word of mouth and kind of very informal, maybe grabbing someone's hand in the hallway and dragging them with you to go do cards. You may also be an organization that's using email, maybe meeting invite systems like Outlook or Eventbrite. You're probably using Excel to kind of track your results and are painfully aware of how fun that can be when you're dealing with multiple locations. Or you may have the volunteer management system that you're already utilizing, and you may be just more curious as to how do you continue to move forward to get those investments in your future. So if you could just respond to the poll and let us know kind of where you are, that would be great.
All right, so launching the poll. Everybody can take a second and respond. Awesome. Got some answers coming in. All right, give you guys a few more seconds to cast your vote. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results.
And so I'm looking at our poll. It looks like the audience is about 50-50. So about half of the people joining us today do have some sort of volunteer management solution that they're utilizing, and then about half are not. So we're going to kind of talk to both of those in terms of just, either if you're trying to figure out how to advocate and kind of move forward with the process of actually making that purchase, but also just if you're in the process of actually looking to purchase something else, how do you navigate through that process so that you can have an experience and not rip out every last strand of hair. And so not unlike building a program, there are often a lot of stakeholders that can help you with this process or can hinder you if they're not engaged early. And so I thought what I would do is ask, Rachel and Debbie, can you just share who you brought to the table when you were starting to go down the path of making a decision to actually purchase, VolunteerMatch?
Sure, this is Rachel. We brought the CEO, the Senior VP of HR, myself, the Silver Lining Program Manager, the CIO. We also brought in the legal team, a subset of our regional ambassadors, and our finance team. And what we did before we presented to them was to really estimate out the time that it was taking globally to manage the program not having a system like VolunteerMatch, and then what are some of the gains that we could have by actually implementing the system. One of the biggest things for us is that we could track our hours per employee, but that was really it. We couldn't see where people were volunteering. We couldn't see what impact we were having on the communities. We also have our annual company-wide day of service. All of that was tracked through Google spreadsheets and manual invites, which tended to get a bit messy. So I think we really came to the point where we're a cloud company. We really need to have an accurate way to track this that's really easy and really works for all of the different regions globally.
Great, thank you. Debbie, any additional groups that you brought into the conversation?
Well, like Rachel, many of the same folks that she mentioned, and we went through that same process. It was really a value statement that we needed to do. But in addition to that, as a health system, many of health systems are investing in electronic medical records and other projects like that. And that was a huge investment for our system, which meant any projects outside of anything focused on that project were going to be looked at very, very closely and needed to get that exception for the approval because it was outside of the scope of that project. So we needed to actually present to the IS executive team and get their approval for a timeline and resources, and that was a huge process of outlining, timelines that were needed for all the components related to their team's resources, because it was going to take their resources away from something that our system is really focused on. So that was really, really important, and luckily when we did the presentation to sell this project to the IS executive team, many of the folks around the room were our executive champions who helped lead, our United Way efforts and Heart Walk. So I really had some champions around the room, and we did get the green light, but we really had to sell it and show the value.
Yes, as I like to say, it takes a village to be able to purchase the system. Yeah, and I'll just add a footnote. In my experience, the other group that, especially if you're in a larger organization, having your purchasing team engaged really early is really critical. And I found that especially if you're trying to purchase any type of software or use software as a service, we're finding more and more that your IT teams and specialized purchasing teams need to be engaged, really to make sure for your protection that you're thinking adequately about risk and, the privacy of information and those types of things. So the sooner you engage those groups, often the better. And so, that kind of leads us into the next piece, which is really, what do I need to consider when I'm looking for a tool? And there's a lot. As you see on here, you have to think about, what kind of reporting you're hoping to get on the back end, what kind of budget do you have, how do you want to reflect your branding? Are you going to want to measure personal volunteerism? Maybe you have a lot of people in the field and you want to be able to see, what's going on in the field, or as Rachel mentioned, what's going on globally. So there's a lot of pieces of information, and so it's always a good practice to really start, before you start looking at vendors, to really start outlining what are those critical features you need, and then actually determining a priority for those items. Unless you build a completely customized solution in-house, the challenge you're going to face is budget, time, and what's available in market. And so being able to think about critically these different factors and how you want to prioritize them can just help you as you evaluate, different vendors, really figuring out which ones are the best for your fit, for your culture, for the types of activities that you're hoping to plan, etc. Debbie, having a program and making the purchase a while ago, what lessons would you say you learned about that experience? Anything that you would have done differently?
Well, I would have to say you know, I had many colleagues in this community. It's really important for us to really benchmark best practices. So it was really important that I did my due diligence and learn from other, you know, successful organizations in this community to know what tools they were using. So I got to learn about VolunteerMatch through that process, and then VolunteerMatch providing demos for our internal stakeholders was so helpful to get additional buy-in. But I would say if I would have done it differently, I would have, you know, gotten this going a lot sooner. You know, it took, I would say, I mean, healthcare is known for not moving very quickly, unfortunately, and so, you know, about 3 years to get it going through the due diligence and learning about the product and hearing from others first, and then getting the buy-in from my VP.
You know, actually going through the contract process does take a lot of time. Rachel, any advice that you would give to people as far as how to keep the process on track and to actually, you know, be able to follow through and actually make the purchase?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, for us, a lot of it was around clearing the budget hurdle, and then once we had that, it was figuring out what the streamline team was going to be. So I didn't set up, you know, weekly or biweekly meetings with everyone who was a stakeholder. I basically chose a select few to really push through that process quickly. Mm-hmm. And so that was our IT, our legal, and our purchasing department. And I just met with them on a regular basis to make sure that things were moving forward. We also met with VolunteerMatch on a regular basis as well, and that team was really helpful in terms of also helping to kind of give information on the process from their side as well. So I would say just, you know, regular cadence of meetings, and then setting your clear goal for when you're going to go live, having your communication plan set up, and making sure that you meet that deadline.
That's great. Thank you for kind of walking through your process. We have a few minutes left, so what we wanted to do is now get to some questions, and so we've been tracking some of the questions that have come in, and so Lauren will help us kind of facilitate those. If we don't get to all the questions, by all means, we'll be able to do some follow-up after this discussion.
Yeah, definitely. So we did have a lot of questions come in, and a lot of people engaged on social media too, which was exciting to see. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on, just to kind of stick in the realm of volunteer management systems,
that with what the overall investment would be, and then what we would actually get out of the balance. So it really was, putting together what Appirio was going to get back from the program, and also the additional visibility that we would get in terms of knowing which nonprofits we were working with, which impact we could have, what stories we could tap into for other things like employee blogs or working with additional nonprofits.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. And Debbie, did you have anything you wanted to share around building that business case internally?
Nothing additional. I think the same process we had moving forward. It was really much, like I said, about the value statement. Again, not having